Welcome to another Sunday WAY ABC4 Community Forum, where we talk to community leaders and local success stories to discuss important information that affects all of us here in Southern West Virginia. I'm your host, Kayvon Izami. Today we are joined by another distinguished guest, Dave Perry. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today on this forum. You obviously bring a lot of experience. You have 35 years as an educator, 16 years in the House of Delegates, so you are bringing a lot of knowledge here today, which we appreciate that. Let's start off by asking you the 86th legislator and what that's all about going on here.
Well, we're beginning the 86th legislative session, and of course, all of us know that West Virginia is a bicameral form of legislature, meaning there are two bodies, the West Virginia Senate and the West Virginia House of Delegates. The West Virginia House of Delegates, of course, serve two-year terms, and they elect their entire body every 2 years. The West Virginia Senate is 134 members, and they elect on a staggered basis every 4 years. And the composition of the West Virginia Senate is 31 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And the Senate to date has passed 58 bills. So it's kind of a quick but slow legislative session this year.
Okay. And so what type of composition are we right now?
Right now, we are what's called a super majority. We, meaning the Republican Party, is the party in control, the majority party.
Okay, awesome. Now talk to us about some of the Senate bills that have passed so far.
Well, let's say this. One difference in this year's legislative session versus last year is the House passed their important bills, or what they consider to be priority bills, over early. The Senate held them for the session. They used one against the other. So that's a big difference in this year versus last year. But some of the Senate bills, and of course, out of the number of bills that were introduced, 57 or 58 passed. We'll try to narrow it down to like Senate Bill 222 allows veterans, which is important bills for veterans, to accept certain amenities in state parks free, such as golfing, such as horseback riding, and so forth. So that's very significant to our veterans. Senate Bill 487 deals with local school improvement councils, or LSICs as we know them, and it will allow or provide for a review of continuing education at the local schools, where each teacher, educator during the year is required to pick up 16 continuing education units. Also, Senate Bill 172 increases the composition of the LSIC, which supposedly is a representative body of all the entities into a school system: parents, administration, teachers, service personnel. So what this will do, it will increase that composition by 1, and that 1 may be a bus driver or a bus operator. And then, of course, I guess one of the most, I don't know whether controversial or not, was introduced last week was Senate Bill 585, which would legalize the use of recreational marijuana in the state of West Virginia. The caveat to that bill was that the proceeds or the monies or the profits from that bill would go to shore up the public employees insurance agency, their health insurance, which they've been looking for a long time for a stream, a dedicated stream to offset that. So it'll be interesting to see, Kayvon, how that comes out. But yeah, that's pretty much a real quick synoptic of the West Virginia Senate in the 86th session at this point.
That's a great job of how you explained all that. Let's just follow up on that last bill that you talked about, because I think a lot of people hear that and their ears might perk up, their eyes might perk up. They might be curious of really what that, if you could just elaborate on some of the pros and cons on if marijuana was legalized.
Well, obviously the initial pro was the caveat that would allow the proceeds to be used for a funding stream dedicated to the public insurance. The pros are individuals who would use it for recreational purpose. I guess it's a pro. The con is it's believed and said in many situations that it's a gateway drug or a gateway controlled substance to larger, more fentanyl and some of the other cocaine uses. And I guess you could say the same about alcohol. Mm-hmm. And that's not to infer I'm pro or con either way, but as you said, these are some of the, and I guess the other thing that comes with that sometimes in states who have done this are the outside interests that come into play as far as undesirables.
No, that's a great way to explain that there. That helps a lot of people just understand what happens when something like a bill like that could possibly be passed. I think the veterans bill is great. That's something we always like to look out, so I love hearing that. Let's talk more about some of the composition of the West Virginia House right now.
All right, the West Virginia House is composed of 100 members. Of those 100 members, all but 11 are Republicans, 11 Democrats, 2-year terms, 3 years for the entire body, not staggered, meaning that body could turn over every year. I know when I was there, out of the 100, there's usually anywhere from 25 to 30 new delegates each year, which tends, in my opinion, to not allow for much change, much like one talks about term limits and so forth, and I'm getting way out in the weeds now. But that is the composition. As I said, it's a super majority. Now, for about 100 and some years, the Democrats controlled the West Virginia legislature. Much of this changed in 2015, Kayvon, when we saw nationally a change from Democrat-controlled areas and states to Republican. And 2015 was the big change for the state of West Virginia and the West Virginia legislature.
That's fascinating. Now here locally, I know before we came on, there was a couple things that you were really excited to talk about, like the Plum Orchard Lake situation going on there.
Thank you for the opportunity to discuss that. Of course, that's a local issue, as you said. Plum Orchard Lake is a recreational lake that was started or founded or licensed or bought and purchased and set up in 1963. Since 1963, there's been very little upkeep. It has continued to fall into disrepair. The amenities are available have disappeared. And at that time, the Plum Orchard Lake was under Parks and Recreation. In 2015, Plum Orchard Lake went to what's known as it went under well, it slips my mind, I'm sorry, but a different agency within the DNR who have a different mission. So what has happened is Senator Laird, myself, and Magistrate Leonard Bickford began a process of petitioners. In 3 days, we had over 200 petitions supporting renovations and a transfer back to Parks and Recreation. Since then, we met yesterday, as a matter of fact. Our entire legislative delegation that has any part of Fayette County met with the bureaucrats in Charleston of the DNR, and there were about 8 there, and discussed what can be done to renovate, rejuvenate Plum Orchard Lake rather than decomposing it. So that was very successful. Looking to the future, each city is being approached to adopt a resolution to support what we're about. So we've asked for a public meeting, we've asked for general meetings, and hopefully a legislative appropriation will be made, it'll be returned to Parks, and it'll be returned to its pristine status that it was in 1963 for the public, not only of Fayette County, but Raleigh, Fayette, Summers, and the surrounding areas.
I think many people would agree that that's awesome. If that can happen, you don't ever want to see something like that go to waste or start to kind of flush away. So, talking more about that, any idea on time frame, if that could happen, when that could happen, or is this all just kind of up in the air from here?
Well, I think the number one domino that has to fall first is there has to be a legislative appropriation to rejuvenate the facility. And the second thing that I think has to happen is it has to be transferred back to Parks and Recreation. So I'd say, the initial, looking for initial response would be the end of this legislative session. What happens?
Okay, I'm sure many people are going to be very excited to see how that goes here. Now, there is another local issue that we talked about before coming on that you were very excited to talk about as well, and that's the Hope Scholarship. If you could elaborate a little bit on that and why that's so important to you.
Well, the Hope Scholarship was passed a couple years ago, and it allows parents to take their children out of the public school system, teach them, send them to a private school, and so forth. In so doing, they take the money with them that was part of the state aid formula, which budgets to provide required services, regardless of whether you have one student or 1,000, reduces the dollars available to public schools. And in so doing, what effect that will have. So, you know, how that's going to be replaced, it's cramping a lot of the school system and causing a lot of reduction in staff. So it affects the state aid formula, and in my humble opinion, something needs to be done to offset that loss of students. It's kind of like turning your lights on. Whether you turn your light on or not, there's a fundamental fee and charge even before. So there are fundamentals that have to be offered in public education regardless of the number of students.
And we all know how important public education is. I mean, that sets up our future, that sets up the generations that are coming. So I understand why that's so important to you.
Absolutely. And Kayvon, as you said, it's for the masses, which is unlike other countries. You know, we teach to the masses and everyone, and we turn no one away. So it is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody's got to be welcomed. Everyone's got to feel welcome. So that's great. Anything else you want to kind of go talk about or elaborate on here as we have this great time for some of our viewers to hear about?
Well, hopefully, if we're taking a little break, we come back, we'll talk about some House bills.
We will definitely do that. And look at you setting up the break. Good, that's their broadcasting instincts right there. So we will take a break. We'll be right back with more Community Forum right after this. Welcome back to another Community Forum where we are honored to bring on a great guest here, Dave Perry, who brings a ton of knowledge, education, experience to a conversation like this, which is exactly what we are trying to do here on Community Forum. Dave Perry, thanks so much for joining us. We had a great first conversation there. Let's now dive into the weeds here into our second part of the conversation. And let's start with, we talked about in the first part of this show about the Hope Scholarship and why it meant so much to you. Right. Now, there's a different part of that, which is the athletic program participation of that Hope Scholarship. Elaborate on that.
Of course, the Hope Scholarship are those students who are no longer part of the public educational system. They are either private, personal, so forth. So, but however, the Hope Scholarship or the provisions of that language allows an individual who is a non-student to participate in athletics. In so doing, that renders a hardship on the athletic budgets to a certain extent, as those possible potential additional athletes would enter the system. However, each county is allowed to charge a fee for participation. But as I said, it's an unanticipated number, which is very difficult to plan for the cost of the additional athletes.
And it can be any number. The school can just pick out a number. It can just be whatever. There's no like designated fee.
There's not a cap, but the school, the system, not the school, the county sets a fee. Could range anywhere from no fee to $200 and some or $500 or what have you. And anyone who's been around athletics knows that equipment is very expensive.
Oh, very.
Helmets, shoulder pads, basketballs, basketball uniforms, and officials. The basketball officials, 3 per game and so forth, are quite a bit for each game. And then, of course, you have your major sports and you have your minor sports. Mm-hmm. Major meaning football, basketball, and then you have track, soccer, any number of sports, swimming and so forth. Absolutely. So that's unpredictable.
Yeah, that's a very fascinating topic there, and you're seeing it in all, not even just high school, college sports. They call the revenue sports, the non-revenue sports, all of that. So Very, very interesting to bring that to light. Let's move to, again, in the first segment, we talked about some of the Senate bills. Let's now look at some of the House bills. I know one that's going on right now is about the concealed carry, that information. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay, there was a bill that House Education passed that had to do with teachers being able to conceal a weapon. Now, as I understand, however, they wouldn't be allowed to do this until proper training. The initial bill said that the Sheriff's Department would provide the training. And I know that there was discussion in the House that perhaps it would include the Sheriff's Department as well as concealed weapons training. As an editorial, I have always, even when I was a legislator, I tried to introduce this. Many people are concerned and frightened that teachers would have access to. However, I think in training is very important, and I've always said this, I don't think you can ever stop what's happening across the nation in terms of guns and violence within schools. However, with the gun, I think you could diminish or lower the potential for the number of persons who may be killed, wounded, or wounded in terms of waiting on the police to arrive. It would be a deterrent, or as I said, you could reduce the number of casualties. And that's not to demean our police, because they're prepared, they practice, and do a very excellent job. But still, there's that delay from the call to,
no doubt.
And we've seen that happen across the country.
Yeah.
Delayed.
It's unfortunate. It's a terrible issue, and I just kind of want to go deeper into it. I know you said that you think it's almost impossible to stop what's happening with some of those schools.
Killings, violence.
Yeah, all that stuff, which is terrible. Any other way you see that we can limit this? Because a lot of people might hear that and be like, so there's no hope, which is unfortunate, because we just keep seeing it happening and happening. Is there anything else that, in your opinion, we can do to try and eliminate this from happening?
Well, I think first of all, we need officers in every school. But I think it's also an educational issue in terms of resources for counseling, resources for continuing education for identification purposes, and the type of intervention you may provide those students who would appear to or have the propensity to commit a crime against their fellow classmates or teachers or so forth. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of indicative of society right now, which is unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate.
But I think we need to provide resources for intervention and counseling and guidance.
Yeah, that definitely can help. There's no doubt about that. I think that's a good point. And again, it's terrible to see, and it feels like it's becoming the norm, which is the last thing that we should have something acceptable in a society like this. Some other House bills going on right now. Okay,
we have another House bill, 4206, that deals with bathrooms in schools, designated according to sex. No unisex bathrooms. Little boys will use the little boys' restroom, little girls will use. Now, both the concealed weapon bill and this bill is held, I won't say held up, but on still in House Judiciary. It was double referenced to House Education, which it's passed, and now it's pending in Senate for them to determine to put it on their agenda or not. And as I said earlier, a lot of these bills are delayed this year because of the gamesmanship that was played last year between the House and the Senate, which happens, believe it or not.
Yeah, and I guess it's hard to get things crossed. What else do we have on there?
Okay, discipline, like I said, seems to be a big issue. House Bill 4776 or 4226 deals with discipline in elementary schools. Now, unawareness or believe it or not, elementary students from kindergarten up are doing some atrocious things, throwing chairs, hitting teachers, language unacceptable. So this extends down into the elementary school that allows a teacher to remove a student, a disruptive element from the classroom. Now, there are some provisions to that say that once that child has been removed, then there has to be a conference with the parents prior to return, or a school-based discipline team will meet on it, discuss it, and see again if resources are needed or interventions are needed prior to return. I have a real problem with this. Discipline I don't have a problem with. I think until we can restore discipline into our schools, we're not going to dramatically affect learning or test scores. But I say that to say this, once that teacher removes that child, where does that child go? Who oversees him or looks after him until such time that he would be sent home or the parents come in? Secondly, when you talk removal, what latitude, this child is disruptive to stop with, obviously not adhering to policy or procedure or acceptable behavior. So, Kayvon, I'm removing you from my class. What happens when Kayvon refuses to get up, take his paper, and leave the classroom?
Yeah.
Usually they'll kick a desk or throw a paper, and they refuse to move. So removal, who, how, when, where. And in so doing, I think the in loco parenti bill or legislation, which was years was the rule of thumb, has to be strengthened or interpreted to allow some of restoration of discipline to occur in schools. But again, do we need discipline? Yes. So there are, as you said earlier or asked earlier, what things do we need to do to help restore discipline? Obviously, we've got families who are no longer, some of the question with the discipline bill is we've got many children who are foster children. So who would represent or who would come and remediate or mediate that discipline behavior and represent that child in a return hearing?
That's a very important issue, and kind of like you just talked about, with discipline is so important, and it's also how some of these kids can learn. So if these kids get removed, what, are they just done with school? Do they have to go to another school? Do they not get a second chance? Those are important factors as well.
You're spot on, Kayvon. Those are all variables that have to be considered. And of course, the issue there is they disrupt your child's education. But as you said, if we don't have an alternative education program or an alternative setting, you're disrupting school, we're going to put you out of school. Well, you've defeated your purpose there.
Yeah.
But we've got to have the alternative programs and resources again to provide interventions or mediation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you on that for sure. Anything else going on in the House bills, or are those all of them that you've hit on so far?
Well, we missed the salary increase bill, House Bill 4202, which gives an across-the-board $2,460 salary increase to teachers and service personnel, which service personnel includes cooks, custodians, aides, bus drivers, etc., $160 a month. And the other significant bill, I think, that has been introduced is House Bill 5243, which is an attempt to define womanhood. And I'm sure that's quite controversial, or will be controversial, in that a lot of bills tend to be focusing on transgender sexual orientation. But this says that a person must, based on their sexual, God-given born, must fill out their birth certificate as such. It doesn't include gender identity, and it addresses the issue of women only in women bathrooms, men only, and women's shelters. And we see the same thing in athletics. It pretty much addresses the athletic situation where several years ago, a young man was allowed to participate in the young girls in girls teams. And our governor has said, guys, boys are boys, and it's unthinkable, I think he said this on a national network, that we're dealing with this kind of issue, right, wrong, or different, pro or con. And of course, again, I'm just trying to represent both sides today.
Absolutely. No doubt, just putting that out there for people to understand what is out there.
That the legislature's dealing with it, Kayvon, yes.
And that's important, so great job there. I want to talk about something that we talked about in commercial break, which is the increase in this Oak Leaf Festival, and something that's going on there. I know you have it down on your paper.
Sure.
Yeah, if you could elaborate there a little bit.
Well, the Oak Leaf Festival occurs every year in the town of Oak Hill. There are, well, we used to call them community partner grants that funds fairs and festivals across the state. Obviously, the expenses have become more. Our local delegate, Elliot Pritt, has asked for an increase in funding for Oak Hill's Oak Leaf Festival to allow that to continue in the same fashion, to be able to bring more known entities in, such as the music groups on Friday night and so forth. So he's asking for increased funding in that.
That's great. More things for people to
local
do.
Local issue.
Absolutely. Now, listen, you obviously have a lot of experience with all of this that we're talking about, a lot of government experience, legislative experience. Why do you think it's important for people to participate in local government?
Well, I think that's the crux of our government. It's important to know and be in touch and have for a feel of what the local people think, feel, and as a representative of those people, you definitely need to hear from your constituency, because as you hear from them, they can dramatically affect the outcome of legislation and how it would affect them and so forth. There's no one size fits all. There's no one who has all knowledge. So the more input you have, the better the piece of legislation. The one thing I always caution is this, Kayvon. Regardless of how simple or dumb a piece of legislation, it's important to someone or some group. And I think you have to keep that in mind as well.
That's very important here. We have 1 minute here left. Anything else you would like to elaborate on or get off your mind here before we wrap it up?
Well, another local issue, not really local, is the Deepwater Mountain issue, where the sharp curve there, trucks belly out and traffic's held up for a number of hours. That's being dealt with. But with the Plum Orchard Lake and all these local issues, I think what is commendable is that every one of our senators and delegates are representatives of Fayette County. Of course, Fayette County was split quite a bit. We've got 3 senators. We've got 3 delegates that represent a portion. They all have come together collectively to try to deal with and find solutions to the issues.
All right. Great job, Dave Perry. Thank you so much for joining us on Community Forum here. We appreciate all your knowledge. We hope that you all join us again next Sunday.